Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this short session for half an hour. I just wanted to talk about eliminating fake work. Now, what do I mean by fake work? Well, obviously, we've all heard about fake news. Fake work, of course, is doing activity in the workplace that doesn't lead directly or indirectly to the strategic direction of the organisation. So that's ultimately what I'm talking about. Now, we know what that entails. It can be mindless emails, meetings that meander, a whole range of activity that might be classified as busy but not necessarily productive. So I'm going to spend a short time talking to you about that from my latest book, and I'll just share my screen for the moment so we can launch into the presentation. Okay, so there are a lot of ways, of course, that we can eliminate fake work, and I want to really just touch on one today, which of course is shared purpose, and share that with you. So I have a book coming out later this year called Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximising Performance Through Empowerment. So I'm going to actually talk a little bit about this proactive paradox. What does it mean, and how does it impact on people's productivity in the workplace? I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation as well that you might like to take advantage of. So if you've got any questions, any comments, observations, go to the question box, or the chat box, I should say, type in your message and I'll get that and I'll respond to it. But I won't be leaving time at the end because we've only got a very short time together. So I appreciate your time, but as soon as you've got something you want to ask, go for it, and I'll get to see that. All right, so, and of course, I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording at the end of this presentation as well. So those of you who don't know me, Tim Baker's my name. A few things about me that may be of interest. This will be book number 10, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, and I've written many books and will continue to do that. I obviously speak at conferences on a range of topics and have done so for a period of time. I'm also an executive coach, and I still play in the Golden Oldies rugby competition here in Brisbane, and we play every second week because it takes about 2 weeks to recover at my age. So that's one of my many interests. So a bit about me. So moving on. One of the objections that you might have around this whole notion of getting rid of this or eliminating this fake work is that there's so much stuff going on in your organisation, it doesn't seem possible to eliminate fake work. Look, it's true that you will never eliminate it totally. There's a colleague of mine, Brett Peterson, in the United States, that argues that 40% of everything we do in the workplace is actually not directly or indirectly linked to the strategic direction of the organisation. Now, obviously, if it's 40%, regardless of what percentage it is, getting it to zero is virtually impossible. So that's not the objective here. But the objective really is, how can we reduce it to a point where it's not quite so significant? So he says that imagine if you could get fake work, as he calls it, from 40% down to 35%. What difference would that make across the organisation? Well, it would be significant. So what we're looking for is to try and trim some of the work that we do, which is busy work, which isn't necessarily useful work. And we've all experienced that, either ourselves, of course, or if we're leaders, see our team members indulging in what we might call fake work. So, I just wanted to address that before we started. It's not so much a question of getting rid of it completely, but how can we at least reduce it somewhat? Now, there are 4 things I'd like to cover in our short session this afternoon. First of all, what is this proactive paradox? And I'll explain that to you in a moment. And it's a new concept that I've come up with. And when I say new, it's probably a new label for an old problem. I'm going to share with you the 4 strategies for empowering team members. I obviously won't get a chance to talk about all 4 strategies, but what I will talk about is one of those 4 strategies, which is shared purpose, and just talk a little bit around that. And then, as I said to you at the outset, I've got a special offer for those of you who have taken the time today to be involved online. Now, we have heard, of course, that 70% of the 70% of the actual employees that we work with are disengaged at work. Now, I'm not sure whether it's 70% or whether it's 60% or whatever, but we do know from surveys around the world that most people are disengaged in their work, which is quite disturbing when we spend 40 years of our life, unless we've won lotto or we've inherited a lot of money. It's likely that most of us will spend 40 odd years in the workplace. That's a fair stint of time to be disengaged in your work. So I want to address that shortly before we launch into the topic proper. We all know what engagement looks like. So it's one of those things that we can observe when we see it. Usually engaged employees are committed to their work and they're actively contributing to organisational performance. It's fair to say that if I was in your workplace tomorrow and I sat there for 20 minutes, you and I could probably get our heads together and work out who's engaged and who's not. So it wouldn't be a great mystery, would it? It's fairly obvious, I think, just by observing people's behaviour. What we do know now from research is that engagement levels, that is, when we can increase engagement levels, it actually does increase the bottom line. Now, I kind of guess intuitively we knew that, but of course now we've backed that up with research. And so obviously, if you can get people more engaged in the work they do, it is likely to increase the bottom line, whatever the bottom line might be. So we do know that, and that's the good news. But the bad news, of course, is that the majority of people are disengaged. So it's an issue that's affecting all industries, right from the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profit. So it's happening right across the board. Now, let me talk a little bit about this proactive paradox. Now, let me explain. There's probably 3 key stages to this paradox. The first stage is that leaders want their team members to show initiative. Now, most leaders want people to show prudent initiative. They want them to be demonstrating independent judgment in their decision making. In other words, they don't want people to come to them for every single thing they need to. They want people to use their own judgment. I think that's fair to say. But also, it's also fair to say that employees also want autonomy. They also want to show initiative and think freely and not be micromanaged by their manager. So at the very outset of this relationship, both parties are on the same side, generally speaking. So what happens is that the leader probably, and maybe you've done it yourself, they turn up to a team meeting and they say to their team members, I want you to show initiative. I want you to back yourself and not just come to me for everything. Just, do what you need to do, show your independent judgment. However, the team members, your team members perhaps, are sitting there thinking to themselves, they won't say it, of course, but they're thinking to themselves, I don't think my manager really believes that. I think he's been to some training program or he's read Tim Baker's book or something. They're obviously thinking to themselves, I don't believe this is true. So what happens is they sit on their hands. They don't show initiative. They don't actually jump into the arena and think independently. And then the manager, observing this behavior, jumps in and decides to fill the void. This is the third level there. So because you see no evidence of people doing that, you jump in and you start doing things. And you do that because you're trying to fill a vacuum. You're taking control. People aren't doing it, so you decide to do it because the product or the service has to get out the door. And then what happens is that the team members are observing you jumping in, and they think it's validated their particular perception that you didn't want them to show independent judgment in the first place. So it creates a paradox that we started on the same page, and what happened is, because nothing happened, you jumped in, and because you jumped in, it validated the employee's view that you didn't really want them to show independent judgment. Now, this happens across all industries. It happens across public, private, and not-for-profits. And the question then is, how do we break this paradox? How do we get people to willingly show their initiative and to do it in a way that is, of course, prudent and productive? That's the question. And of course, lots of leaders grapple with that, bearing in mind that most people are on the same page to start with. So that is, in essence, what the paradox is all about. Now, in order to break that paradox, there are 4 particular proactive strategies that you can adopt. And in my book, of course, I go into great detail what these strategies are. Not only do I explain them to you, I also give you some very practical things that you can do in these 4 particular areas. So we've got shared purpose. Now, shared purpose is a strategy where you and your team members are on the same page. So in other words, they know what the purpose is, you know what the purpose is, and there's no daylight between those two. And because there's a shared purpose in a team, the team members themselves can feel comfortable and confident as to when they can show their initiative, because they know exactly what's required of them in order to achieve the purpose. Now, easier said than done, of course, and I'll explain how you can go about that in a moment. Boundary management, on the other hand, which is the second one, is where you demonstrate to your team members where you're expecting proactive behaviour, where you're expecting your employees to show their independent judgment, and also where not to. In other words, there are certain things where you want your people to follow systems, processes, and procedures, and there are also other places where you want them to back their own judgment. So boundary management is about clarifying what those boundaries are, so that people know when it is safe and reasonable to jump in and show independent judgment. Information exchange is a process where you enter into a collaborative partnership with your team members so that you're both working together to resolve the problems. The argument is, if you have a better working relationship with your team members, where there's an abundance of conversation and consideration and dialogue about what needs to happen and how problems can be solved, the argument is that you and your team member will be on the same page. And if you're both on the same page, then the team member will feel comfortable about exhibiting and they'll feel comfortable about exhibiting their proactive behaviour, because they know they're on the same page as you. Now, proactive accountability is slightly different. And this is very relevant to organisations that are quite bureaucratic. So, for example, the military or police, where you've got a very distinct hierarchy. And in those cases, you don't want people to show too much initiative. In those sort of circumstances, you are not eliminating initiative completely, but you want people to follow the system. So in other words, you're saying to your employees, it is perfectly okay for you to show initiative, but you should understand that the consequences of that initiative will be your responsibility. So in other words, if the initiative doesn't go well, then the employee takes the rap. So it still allows employees to show initiative, but only at their own cost. In other words, if the initiative doesn't lead to a good outcome, then the employee themselves would take the rap. So obviously these 4 would depend on what industry you're in and where you work and your relationship with your team members. So I'm just going to touch on the very first one, which is shared purpose, And then, in subsequent webinars, I'll talk about the others, and you can find out more about it in my new book. So the problem with a purposeless team, a bit hard to get my tongue around that one, but with a team that doesn't have a purpose, we have a few issues with that, of course. A team without a clear and compelling purpose gets sidetracked easily and frequently, true? So what that means, of course, is that a lot of fake work is generated in a purposeless team because team members aren't clear about what the strategic direction of the team is. So what that means, the corollary of that is if we can get the purpose clear in a team, then obviously that will reduce the amount of fake work. So a purposeless team is busy working on activities that aren't useful, basically, and they're neglecting tasks that are pivotal to its purpose. But of course, they do that because they're not clear about what the purpose is. Now, I realise you're not working in a vacuum, and your manager or those above you may not have a clear purpose, so you may be in the dark in somewhat in that sense. So I realise it's not just simply a case of you developing a purpose, although I would say to you that regardless of whether or not you're clear about your purpose, it's useful for you and your team to work on a shared purpose, to work out what you should be doing, so that we can at least eliminate some of the fake work that continues in teams that are purposeless. So that is very, very important. Now, one of the simplest things you can do, I should say, is to get your team together at a team meeting and just ask them, what is the purpose of our team? Which is a great question. And actually have a conversation about that and have a listen to what people have got to say and try and realign your idea of what the purpose is with your team members. That's a very simple thing that you can do. And it's quite surprising when you do that, what people tell you. It really is. You don't be surprised if you hear things that are really off purpose. And this could, of course, explain their own particular work habits and behaviours, because what they might articulate to you in that meeting could explain why they're off track and working on fake work and so forth. So a purposeless team is not ideal, and I'm sure you don't want to be working in a purposeless team. What I suggest you do is you think about creating a purpose for your team. And I mean literally create a purpose. That is a purpose statement for your team. Now, a purpose statement is a bit like a coat hanger. Now, we've all got plenty of coat hangers in our cupboard. We're not short of them. They seem to breathe. You'd understand that. And they're pretty useless and can even be downright annoying unless, of course, we hang a garment from it. So we can hang a pair of trousers or a shirt or a skirt or something from a coat hanger. So the coat hanger is good for actually shaping the garments that hang from it. So I want you to think about a purpose statement as a bit like a coat hanger. On its own, it's useless. It's just a bunch of words, just like a coat hanger is just something that hangs in a closet. However, it can be very useful if everything that is done in the team is aligned with that purpose statement. So the key is, how do you get a purpose statement that everyone will buy into? That's the question for you to consider. Well, the way to do that is to take your team with you. So you could sit there and develop the purpose statement and impose it on the team, and you could argue that the purpose statement is very much aligned with what should be done. But the big question is, have your team bought into that purpose? And I suspect they won't buy into that purpose if they have no say in that purpose. So what can you do? Well, here are some questions you could ask yourself. And of course, you'll get these slides later. But you can ask your team these questions. Now, I think it'd be well worth a discussion with your team about this. So, for example, you say, as a team leader, the first thing you could ask is, do I know my team's purpose? Have I communicated that purpose to all my team members? Do my team members actually understand the purpose and its role and their role in that? Do all my team members accept the purpose? Are all my team members committed to the purpose? Do all my team members know how their work is tracking against the team purpose? And am I supporting my team members to achieve that purpose? Now, this is the way to manage expectation. But I think what is more useful for you once you have grappled with those questions is to design a purpose statement with your team. Now, a purpose statement is a one-sentence statement. It's not a paragraph, nor should it be a page or anything like that, because frankly, people just get, the eyes glaze over and people aren't with it. If you can't articulate in one sentence what the purpose of your team is, then you haven't really worked out what the purpose of the team is. So what are some of the organisations that we know have got purposes? Here are 3 companies that you would know: Coca-Cola, Apple, and Ben and Jerry's. Now, they each have a purpose statement for the organisation. Your organisation probably has a purpose statement or a vision statement, whatever you want to call it. Now, I think if it's good enough for an organisation to have a purpose statement, it's good enough for the team to have a purpose statement. Now, obviously, the team purpose statement has to be consistent with the organisational purpose statement, but the organisational purpose statement is probably too broad for the team. So you need to distill that down and talk to your team members about a purpose statement. And it should be a one-sentence statement. Now, I can tell you that the very best way to do this is to use a normative approach. So what you do is you get your team members to actually each write down what they believe their purpose statement is for the team. You need to give them some examples, such as I'm showing you on the screen, of some purpose statements so that people actually understand what a purpose statement is. You get them to write it down. And then once everyone's written down the purpose statement, you break them up into pairs. So for example, if you've got, say, 6 people, then you break them up into 3 pairs. And each of those pairs sits with each of those people sit with another person, and they share their purpose statement with their partner. And what that person does is does the same. And their task is to come up with a purpose statement that covers both purpose statements, and one that everybody, when I say everybody, the 2 people are happy with. Now, it might take one piece out of this and one piece out of this, but at the end of the day, you end up, and it doesn't take a day, it'll only take you about 20 minutes. They'll come up with a statement that they're both happy with. One person might look at the other person's statement and say, that's it. That's exactly what I think too. I just couldn't express it in words. But the bottom line is both of them have a say in it. Then what you do is you then join with another team, and you keep doing that process until you end up with one purpose statement. And you'll be surprised at how quickly you'll come to arrive at a purpose statement. But the reason why this is effective, and I'm sure you can work this out, is that it's not your data, it's their data. And people don't argue with their own data because they've come up with a team purpose statement. And don't be worried about this. It'll all come out in the wash. With the collective wisdom of your team, you'll come up with a statement that pretty much nails what your team does. Everyone will be committed to that purpose statement for the simple reason they've all had an input into it. It may not be exactly, the final product may not exactly be the purpose statement they came up with, but through the process of dialogue and discussion, everyone will be committed to that purpose statement. And then, of course, the job for you is to hold people accountable for that purpose statement. So everything should be seen through the prism of that purpose statement. Everything that's said, thought about, and done should be directly or indirectly linked to that purpose statement. And this is a very good exercise because what you're doing is you're creating psychological safety in your team. And you're doing that in a way that is relevant and people can feel comfortable about what it is. Now, there's lots of material out there, and my book covers a chapter on this, but A purpose statement should be inspirational. It should be expressed in a single sentence. It should focus on one key driver, not several. It concentrates on an end user. So if you're an internal service provider, for example, that's what you concentrate on. It needs to be created collaboratively in order to get the buy-in from the people who you might lead. Now, you'll be pleasantly surprised if you're willing to hold the line on that and do this, how incredibly useful it is to create a shared purpose. And what will happen is that you will minimize fake work because people are on purpose. They know what's required of them. Of course, you can feel much more comfortable giving feedback to people about whether or not they're meeting that purpose. So that is a very useful exercise that I'd strongly recommend that you do. You can also do a team values charter, and I have more to say about that. I think I've got a free webinar coming up in a couple of weeks, and you're more than welcome to tune into that. And I'll talk a little bit about the team values charter, but I don't have time today to do that. But that's another way of creating shared purpose and reducing fake work. All right, so what I wanted to do here is also just say to you towards the end of our time together today is this. I have every Friday, I have a free 30-minute webinar on an interesting aspect that I'd like to think is practical. You're more than welcome to come to any of those sessions. I've got one next week called Shifting from a Job Focus to a Performance Focus, and that's on Friday next week, starting at 10 o'clock. Now, I'll be sending these slides to you, and you can see down the bottom there's a link. So all you've got to do is click on the link, register yourself for next Friday, and you're in. So, and of course, there are many others that I've got. Well, in fact, I've got one every Friday. So more than welcome to do that. Now, the other thing that I'd say just before I wrap up is my book, as I said, is out later this year, Breaking the Proactive Paradox, Maximizing Performance Through Empowerment. And you can, I know that it'll be on sale for $40 plus postage when it comes out. Now, if you're interested in pre-ordering, I will offer you that book for $30 for the fact that you pre-ordered. And of course, I will sign that book and send it out to you before it's mass produced. If you want to take advantage of that, all you've got to do is send me an email by the close of business today. I will put you simply on a list, and in due course, I'll send you an invoice and you'll get the book for a discounted price and won't have to pay the full price. So that will be available to you because you've taken the time out today, your busy schedule, to get involved in what we're doing today. So more than happy to do that. So folks, that's pretty much it from me. I'll just close that down for a moment and finish up what we're doing. So are there any questions that anyone's got before we wrap up? Any sort of comments and observations or whatever? We've just got a minute or two. All good? Okay, so really I'll send you a copy of the slides. I'll send you a copy of the recording. Just send me an email if you're interested in getting a pre-ordered copy of this book. We'll sort that out for you at this end without a problem at all. But do think about creating a purpose statement. Now, if you've got a purpose statement for your team and it's not quite working out, well, then obviously at any time you can revisit that. But the whole purpose, or the whole purpose of the purpose statement, if you like, is to try to reduce or minimize fake work so that you can keep people on task for longer. And I can assure you that your team members will appreciate that, because there's nothing worse than working in a situation where you really aren't clear what the expectations are. And the best way to do that, of course, is to create a purpose statement. In other words, you are fulfilling what I'm talking about with this shared purpose strategy. So thanks, folks, for your time. and keep your eyes peeled in your inbox for a copy of the slides and the recording. Thanks, everyone. All the best. And by the way, have a really good weekend, and we'll catch you hopefully next week. Thank you and goodbye.